You have pinpointed missiles, just like you have pinpointed tweets, you have pinpointed social media posts. You need to counter the false narrative. Otherwise, there will be tension, and tension will lead to violence. India, particularly, is a target. Big players who are looking at a bigger picture where they just want to contain the Indian rise. India is facing problems from two places. So you have China, you have Pakistan, then you have players in the United Kingdom, then you have players in Canada, then you have players in Germany, then you have players in Turkey. It took nothing less than the Prime Minister to respond. Prime Minister's response is actually a message to all those in the government that they need to respond much more faster than waiting for a bureaucratic exercise. Indian bureaucracy has a colonial mindset. Everybody is looking behind the shoulder and says, should I do it or shouldn't I do it? Social media does not allow you that option. You have to bat on the front foot, otherwise you'll be bold.
Once, war began with guns, artillery and airstrikes. Now they start in silence. Weapons sheath, keyboards clacking. A planted news story to rattle markets, a single viral post on X, a bot swarm, an Instagram smear, or a covert hack on the grid or a nuclear facility. The tools have changed, but the targets remain the same. A nation's resources, its people, its reputation. Much like other countries, India has been facing this war as well. So how are nations responding to it? Is India prepared to respond to such a war? And how should it in an ideal situation? That is what we are going to discuss in this episode of Point Blank with Shishir Gupta, Executive Editor, Hindustan Times. Good morning, sir. Thank you for taking out the time. It's an important subject, sir, because, as I said in my introduction and we were talking earlier, you pointed out that the war now is not just fought on the borders. It is fought inside, a country as well, and perhaps even against the nationals of that country and other countries. We'll talk about those specific examples, but for our audience's sake, could you just explain these layers to us, how war has become layered, more complex? It's not just about guns and bombs and aircraft now.
See, Abhishek, right now perception is bigger than reality. And this actually is now war by other means. So what is happening is that the same things that, you have pinpointed missiles, just like you have pinpointed tweets, you have pinpointed social media posts, you have pinpointed Instagram posts, which are designed to create chaos and tension. And the government, which is bound by a certain degree of, bureaucracy, layered bureaucracy, so the time gap of replying is a bit more. But by the time, the entire thing has been done. So this is what is being played out, and it's being played out with the social media being a huge force multiplier. It's basically weaponizing, social post against a particular country with a particular objective. Now, on that are powers which are riding, on that powers which are enabling, so that, they actually amplify the entire post against a particular country with their own interest in mind. So you have multiple players within the country, outside the country, state players, non-state players. On April 30th, Prime Minister Narendra Modi had addressed the heads of mission in India. And these were people, envoys all over the world, that assembled to hear the Prime Minister. The single most important point that the Prime Minister made was that, listen, I don't want you to look back at Delhi to respond. I want you to counter the false narrative against India. Use my popularity, use my credibility. Even if you were to get it wrong sometimes, I'll back you up, but at least respond. If something happens all over the world, they start looking at Delhi. And Delhi starts preparing its own homework. By the time the damage has been already done. India particularly is a target. It's a huge target because it has adversaries both on the western border, northern border, and then there are these big players who are looking at a bigger picture where they just want to contain the Indian rise. Are you prepared with a narrative? How soon can you launch a narrative? How soon can you counter fake news? How soon can you counter fake memes? How soon you can counter what is coming against your country with facts? Because this is what is the new age war. This is what the Chinese prepared for when they prepared a new division which was called information warfare.
Is that why the Prime Minister had to personally fact check a particular news story, which was, of course, on foreign travel tax, and he had to do it personally, something which we haven't seen before?
See, the Prime Minister had to respond personally because there was a time lag of nearly 12 hours in response from the government. The issue was that the Prime Minister was headed from UAE to Netherlands, and Netherlands is one of our biggest investors. In fact, the story was weaponized, so to speak. And the Prime Minister had no options because nobody was replying to it. And he had to intervene himself personally, which is normally not the case. But the story was totally wrong, it was mischievous, and it was designed for a particular objective. Now, what should have happened was that when this person, if at all, had followed the due diligence, there should have been a response from either the Finance Ministry or the Ministry of Information and Broadcasting, or from the spokesperson. But none of that happened. And it was designed at a time when India was facing some sort of economic constraints. So it was a weaponized story and he had to react. In government, normally what happens is that everybody wants to play safe. So they start asking the other person, did this happen to you? Then you send a reply back. By the time everybody is talking about it and the damage has already been done. So that is why it took nothing less than the Prime Minister to respond. The Prime Minister's response is actually a message to all those in the government that they need to respond much more faster than waiting for a bureaucratic exercise where the Undersecretary talks to the Deputy Secretary talks to the Joint Secretary talks to Additional Secretary, Special Secretary, then the Minister, then the PS, and then so on and so forth.
Another story which came up, and we were talking earlier, we discussed this story in some detail. That was, of course, a story on the fact that RBI is apparently selling its gold reserves to protect, of course, the rupee. And that story was also seen in this light. Can you talk to us about that story and the significance and the timing of it?
See, again, that story came at a time when everybody was talking about, India was facing economic hardships. The rupee dollar exchange rate was going down in favor of the dollar. And the story came at a time, so basically creating confusion, basically creating that the country was going down economically, which is not the case because the country ultimately registered a 7.7% GDP growth. That story had to be cut down. But again, there was a time lag of nearly 12 hours. The investors and all, they start looking at these stories because these are actually what are seen to be credible platforms. And when the credible platforms start weaponizing story, then it becomes a much bigger exercise. And so it is important for the government to react immediately and declare it fake news. India has a huge bureaucracy and people just don't want to take something on their own. By the time, the story is spread. Now it is all sort of, there is truth, half-baked truth, and so on and so forth. So, so everybody says maybe they are hiding something. But the fact remains is the story was wrong. So the sooner you respond to it, the better it is. And there should be consequences for such stories. If you can't deliver consequences, they'll keep on repeating again. Okay, this is like the Operation Sindoor. Initially, when you didn't react, the Pakistani went hammer and tongs at you, as if you had lost the entire Indian Air Force.
So you're saying as far as these stories are concerned, of course, there'll be, criticism of the government because it has been in power for 3 terms now, right? The 3rd term ongoing. But as long as it is known to someone in the ministry, it is known to the powers that be, that this story is factually incorrect, it should be responded to as soon as possible so that fake narratives don't take root.
Absolutely, because nobody's against a credible story. Nobody will say that, don't do a credible story. The point is, if you start doing mischievous, malicious element, if you start weaponizing this thing against the government, against the country, then it becomes a much bigger issue where much larger players are involved. Because you see, ultimately, it's all the market is playing up. People are shorting, people are making money out of it. Somebody is making money deliberately because there's somebody who's doing the wrong story.
India is not just facing these attacks on its borders and across its borders, but also against Indians who are living in different countries. For example, a recent story, which of course happened in Singapore, where Indians were targeted. And, the videos with which they were targeted, it is being said as per various reports that these videos originated, on some Chinese platforms first, and then they spread to other platforms like Facebook, X, and Instagram. And what the Singaporean government had to do, because these were trying to, drive a racial wedge amongst the multicultural society that Singapore is that it had to ban, these platforms and these posts, etc. So how should India respond to such things? Because in this case, this is happening, far away from India's geographical borders.
See, in this particular case, it has nothing to do with India. It is more to do with Singapore. Let me tell you what.
No, I only said against Indians.
No. You have a point over there, but I'm telling you what really happened in this particular place. Now, what has happened is that Indians in Singapore are 9% people of Indian origin are in Singapore. 74% of Chinese origin people live in Singapore. But the Indians, due to their industry, due to their hard work, are also people who are at the top echelons of the Singaporean society. Indian origin politicians are there at the apex level. These particular posts were deliberately done to target the Indian leadership, to target the Indian community. It was Chinese versus Indians in Singapore. Okay, using the anti-Indian platform. But it had nothing to do with India per se. But over there, the narrative was to somehow, discredit the Indians over there because they seem to be doing much better. There are a lot of CEOs are Indian over there. There's a lot of investors are Indian over there. So that is what the whole aim was.
When Prime Minister of a country acknowledges that, and in this case, I'm talking about Benjamin Netanyahu, because in a recent interview, he claimed that, Pakistani bots are, trying to smear the Israelis and the Jewish population in the US and riling up the others, in this case, the majority US population against, the Jews in US. Then that tells us something even more, dangerous, that even small players like Pakistan, like Bangladesh, like Nepal, perhaps in certain situations, and we'll come to it eventually, could also play like a crucial role and could be used, to attack countries, in this case, Israel, but I'm just using that as an example to talk about the larger story.
What Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said was perhaps the correct thing, because you see, when it comes to India is facing problems from two places, clearly, which are state-sponsored. One is Pakistan, the other is China. Both are authoritarian societies. Both the intelligence over there is handled by the military, the ISI or the MSS. It's not like the Indian intelligence, which is a civilian intelligence, which is sort of, which is more liberal, so to speak. They are in mission mode. So when they are in a mission mode, they decide what they have to do against India. So you see a whole lot of tweets which are generated targeting towards India. Now, that's one part of it. So you have China, you have Pakistan, then you have players in the United Kingdom. Then you have players in Canada. Then you have players in Germany. Then you have players in Turkey. Now, these people, what they do is that they ride on the anti-India narrative. So there is the original content creator, then there are force multipliers, then there are amplifiers, then there's who ride on the entire thing. Within India, there is a lot of people who are sort of, defined as so-called left liberals. Because they hate the current government, they will do anything. Now, on that are riding the opposition parties. Now, I'll give you a specific example. Now, recently, the Rashtriya Swatantra Party, Rabi Lami Chhane had come to India. I mean, he wrote an article, sort of bringing India and Nepal close in the Hindustan Times itself. And it was an exclusive article for that. Now, he talked about, how the two countries can work together. It was followed by the visit of the Foreign Minister, Shishir. But the left liberals, the so-called elements who believe in the Aman Ki Asha gang which lives in Nepal, or those people who are associated with SAFMA, those people started asking the pinpointed question, why didn't you raise border issue? Why didn't you raise border issue? Why did you say that the Nepal had actually encroached Indian land? The fact of the matter is, what he was telling was the truth. But the two sides wanted to come close to each other because that's how the societies are. There is no border between India and Nepal. Similarly, you have a lot of left liberal media platforms in the West whose target is purely India. So they'll amplify anything anti-India that comes out. Even if sort of 1,200 people assembled together at some place in Jantar Mantar, they'll play it out as if 12 lakh people assembled over there. Social media doesn't have to rely on credibility. It's who's coming first on the block. Now, for that, you have to respond as fast as they do, or you make them pay for it. The government is on the back foot because of its size, because of its sort of, lethargy. But the fact remains is, if they don't respond, this will continue. There are people in Turkey, there are people in Middle East who will target India on various things like, minority issue. So you will have a Muslim issue, you will have a Sikh issue, you will have then you have a caste issue, you have a Dalit issue. So all these people will amplify as if there is a huge chaos going on within India, which is none of the cases happening over there. You need to counter the false narrative as soon as possible. Otherwise, there will be chaos in the society. Otherwise, there will be tension, and tension will lead to violence.
Are there other ways that you can think of in which India should respond to, of course, such narrative wars?
Information warfare is as big as, normal warfare, so to speak. This is the one which creates dissension within the societies. And they are not only these two. I mean, you can identify state players, that is China and Pakistan. But it's not the US which is the state player over there, which is, and it's people within US who are doing it. So people within US and then people within India joining together and then creating a narrative. Now, the narrative could be political, the narrative could be social, the narrative could be anything. What you need to do is you need to pick it up as fast as possible. You're dealing with intelligence agencies which are run by the military. They are absolutely focused. I mean, it's like the IRGC going after the US, the focus going after Israel. So when you deal with such people, you have to be much more faster, much more nimble-footed. So, and then you have to also preempt the narratives that are coming out. I'm not saying that you lie. What I'm saying is that you counter with facts. You also make other people accountable for the false narrative that they're spreading. It's a warfare by other means, straight and simple. And that is why it is one of the key elements in the PLA which is taught. ISI runs a full-fledged show on this. And here what is happening within India is you have military intelligence, which is a very specific job. Civil intelligence is doing various other things. The point is, nobody is looking at the power that actually social media is wielding.
It's getting really, really complex to deal with the situation. As you said, preempting in a physical war where you're talking about guns and missiles and aircraft is complicated in itself. But then trying to, preempt attacks in the era and on platforms, social media platforms, becomes even more complex.
See, Abhishek, both things are working together. They're parallel. Either you're using, kinetic weapons or you're using information weapons. Yeah. But they are both weaponized. And believe you me, they create chaos. Now, it's very simple to tell the world that, actually the revolution, the so-called revolution in Nepal was brought in by Gen Z. It's a simplistic explanation. The fact remains, there were much more bigger players. There were players who were using these guys as marionettes. And these powers were based in US. These powers were based in Europe. Similarly, in Bangladesh, you think it was so innocent that happened over there.
And way back, Arab Spring.
Arab Spring. How it led to chaos, how it led to butchering of people. But, similarly, Pakistan, Imran Khan. These are not innocent things that happen. Sri Lanka, Maldives. So for countries which are growing, creating firewalls, ensuring that the people are safe from these bombardments of these information bombardments of false narratives, that has to be taken care. Indian bureaucracy has a colonial mindset. It's still locked in its British era thing. It's gained, people have tried to push it out, but everybody is looking behind the shoulder and says, should I do it or shouldn't I do it? Now, social media does not allow you that option. You have to bat on the front foot, otherwise you'll be bold.
Otherwise, you'll be bold. All right. On that note, thank you so much for discussing this complex subject with us. Of course, I'm sure just what we have spoken about will not be enough, because it is really complex, it is really layered. So in perhaps some of the next few episodes, we will discuss specific examples as well. But for this one, thank you so much for taking out the time and doing this. Thank you.